Hey, so we are here with the new lecture of the series, the business model canvas. In the previous lecture, we discussed the value proposition canvas. I hope you remember what we discussed in the value proposition canvas. Just to give you a reminder that value proposition canvas is all about answering this very basic question, that why the customers are going to buy our products. Does it make any sense to the customers to buy our products, or does it make any sense to produce or develop that certain product for the customer, right? So that is basically what we discussed in the previous lecture. We also discussed in the previous lecture that the value proposition canvas was developed from the very business model canvas developed by Alexander Osterwalder. We said that it was actually the business model canvas that was developed initially by the Alexander Osterwalder. But later on, during different workshops, he realized that the people are filling the business model canvas totally differently. So he came up with the idea of introducing the value proposition canvas. So now we are coming to the whole of the value proposition canvas, or how the whole of the business model should be developed, right? So the business model canvas is basically about how the organization creates the value. It not only creates the value, but also delivers and captures that value for its stakeholders. In other words, does the business model or the overall business makes any sense to the company itself and the partner it has in the business, right? Actually, we are talking about the different stakeholders. Stakeholders are There are three main stakeholders of the company, with the fourth little bit passive stakeholder of the business. The first main stakeholder of the company is the company itself, is the entrepreneur itself. Entrepreneur is the main stakeholder. The second stakeholder of the business are the investors, those guys who finance their money in the business. Maybe it is the banks, maybe it is the family or the friends, or maybe some other venture capitalists. So these are the guys who gets the value from the business. If the business becomes successful, they get the value in terms of increasing their assets. The third stakeholder of the company are the customers themselves. What is the value that the customers get from the business? Is it the better products? It is the better service that the customers get from the company or from the entire business? So what is in it for the customers? What value the customers derive from the business itself? So these are the three main stakeholders of the business. The fourth one are basically the employees of the business. Sometimes they do not have any decision in the operations of the company. The entrepreneur has the decision making power, the investor has the decision making power, the customer has the decision making power, but employees do not have. But again, the employees are affected by the business in a positive way, in a negative way. In a positive way, if the business progresses, so again the employees become well off. But if the business fails, then the employees have to go home empty handed and they lose their jobs in the process. So again we are emphasizing that it is basically the creation of the value that each stakeholders derives from the business. So does it make any sense to any of the stakeholders? So basically the business model canvas communicates it to all the stakeholders. Another thing that we need to understand about the business model canvas, it is a new idea, and traditionally the companies would focus on excellent products. It was understood by the companies or the top management that if you produce the best products, the customers will come running after you. But later on, we came to understand from the failure of the Nokia company that it's not the product, but rather it's the value that the customers look at. So the entire focus shift in the modern century, in this 21st century, the business management literature put more emphasis on the business model because it talks about the value of the business. It talks about what value the customers are getting from the products. For example, I have discussed this in the detailed case study about the Nokia failure. Nokia was producing excellent phones, but later on in the early 21st century, they lost market to the Apple. Why? Because the customers were not interested in the product itself, but they were more interested in the value the Nokia or the iPhone were given. Nokia had no app store. There was the main value hidden, and Apple had the value there. Nokia relied on the Windows system while Apple had to develop its own entire ecosystem. At the same time, the Android phones were more successful than the Windows phone because there were so many options, so many apps, and so many people were developing the value in the Android ecosystem. So actually, it's the value that people buy, not the product that the people buy. So this understanding is the key to understanding how to compete in this modern world, how to run a business, how to start a business. So the business model canvas basically emphasizes on the value. That is why we have defined here in the initial introduction of the business model, that it is the rationale of how an organization creates, delivers, and captures value. Right? I hope I have made it more clear to you guys that it's the value that the companies are producing and not the product and the services that the companies are producing. So the shift is required. There are certain advantages of the business model and why the business model is important, because one, it is the extension of the feasibility analysis we introduced in the previous lectures. Again, it makes any sense to you if the business model canvas or the overall story or the overall picture lacks some important elements, right? So if there are certain elements or certain actors or certain actions which doesn't make any sense, which means your business model has certain flaws. So which means it's not feasible to start that business. That story or that movie should never be made, because it would be a failure in the market. It would never be liked by the people. It would never be recommended by one guy who watched the movie to another guy who is asking about whether or not he should watch the movie. So the complete story, everything should be completely written, and it should make sense, and it should be liked by the customers, like the movie. So again, it is the extension of the feasibility analysis. Second advantage or the benefit of the business model canvas, it gives you more focus. It makes you more focused on what on the overall whole of the business, right? So when you look at each and every component of the business model, so again you would realize that this part makes any sense to the other part, right? So it helps you become more focused. And again, an even entrepreneur, when he thinks about an idea and starting that idea, his thinking is so dispersed. He thinks about all the areas. Sometimes he is thinking about the marketing, sometimes he's thinking about the customer relationship, sometimes he's thinking about certain unnecessary elements of the business, sometimes he just shows up as an entrepreneur, so he's not focused. So in the initial stages, the focus is important, and the business model basically gives you that focus. The third advantage of the business model canvas, or using or filling the business model canvas as an entrepreneur, is how it describes why the network of participants is important to make the business idea viable. Why you need partners. Partners could be in the back end, partners could be in the front end. When we say the back end partners, we mean the suppliers of the raw materials are the key components of the business, right? For example, the Dell computers, they have the partners in the backward integration. They have done partnership with the Intel company, so they provide them with the processors. At the same time, when you want to buy a Dell computer, you have to go to their website, or you would call them to order a computer. So who would carry their computer from the factory to the final consumer houses or maybe the offices? So the courier company. So Dell computers need the network of participants, both at the back end and the front end. Each company requires that. Each company requires that, right? So that is the basic advantage of the business model canvas. It basically gives you the focus, which partners are more important for the business and which partner you should just ignore because they are not giving any value to the business. Again, the value is important for the business. Who brings value to the business? Because what are you doing in the business? You are creating the value. So you need valuable partners in the business, right? And again, they should also get some value from your business. So it should be win-win situation for you and your partners at the same time. Now, the fourth advantage is it gives a clear picture. to all the stakeholders, that it makes any sense, right? It articulates a company's core logic to all the stakeholders, and we discuss the four stakeholders, right? One, the entrepreneur; two, the investors; and third one were the customers, and including the firm employees. And we mentioned that those are a little bit passive stakeholders of the company. Sometimes they do not have anything to say in the main decisions of the company or the strategic decisions of the company. So that is why we have put them a little bit outside of the main stakeholders of the business, right? Now, the components of an effective business model are the core strategy, how the company competes. Just to make the point clear in a quick way, I would say that in the past, or even some companies now who are operating in a traditional way, they resort to price wars. What are price wars? Price wars are basically when there are two competitors and they want to beat each other, and by attracting customers to themselves, they go by reducing the prices. So that is the only way they know how to compete in the market, reduce the price level, and the customers would come to you, right? When the other competitor sees that he is losing the customers, so in order to win back those customers, he reduces the price more than his competitor. And the process goes on, and then the other competitor reduces the price, and then this. So in the price wars, who wins and who loses? The company loses and the customer wins. We saw that in the telecommunication companies example. The telecommunication companies, the different companies, the Telenor and the Jays and the other companies in the early 21st century or 10 years ago, they started the price wars, right? In order to win the customers, in order to gain the market share, they would go or they would succeed by reducing the price level. So the companies would go to them. The customers would go to them. And when other companies saw them, so the other company would also reduce the price level, right? So that is the core strategy how a company competes basically. Now in this business model canvas, how the company competes, right? So that must be laid down in the business model, how the company is going to compete. So that is one important element, one effective component of the business model, right? The second component that makes an effective business model is the strategic resources, the resources that are essential to produce a certain product or service, right? So resources are mentioned in the business model. The third component that is mentioned in the business model is the partnership network. The fourth that is mentioned is the customer interface, how this business model would interact with the customers, because the user experience is so much important, or the customer experience is so much important. So these are the four main components of an effective business model. We would use the Alexander Osterwalder business model canvas that has 9 building blocks, and those 9 building blocks are basically the represents the 4 components of the effective business model. We will discuss that in detail later on. This is how the business model looks like. This was developed by Alexander Osterwalder. These are the 9 building blocks. And if you can see, or if you can relate the core components of the business model, which were the 4 main components, so you could see here in the core strategy, it is the value proposition. At the same time, in the revenue stream, the price strategy could be another thing, right? So that is how the company. So if a company is, now there are 2 different ways a business model can work. One is the value based, and the other one is the cost driven approach. In the value driven, the company competes on the value, like Apple is competing on the value. It never goes with the lower price mobile phones, right? But another company could be, for example, Q Mobile or any other mobile company could be competing based on the prices, right? So that depends on how the company decides which core strategy. So the value proposition and the revenue stream represents those core strategy components, right? Similarly, the customer segments, the customer relationship, and the distribution channels represents the customer interface. And then the key partners, the key resources that we mentioned, and the key activities basically, and the cost structure. So all of these 9 building blocks are actually these 4 components of the effective business models, right? Now, there is an important question that need to be asked. Can the business model be changed? Can a business do the business differently? What is your answer? Write your answers in the comments below. Okay, so now when you have decided if the business models can be changed, now I'm giving you certain questions to make your minds more clear. Now we know the Yahoo company is failing. Can Yahoo company do something to make itself successful again? Can they change? In other words, can they change their business model? Can they change the way they used to do business? And they should introduce new ways of doing the business now. Can they change their core strategy? Can they change their customer interface? Can they change their resources? Another example could be Nokia. Nokia has failed. Can they revive their company again by changing their business model? What do you say? So the main question, can the business model be changed? Actually, yes, you can change the business model canvas. And there are certain ways, there are certain techniques that you apply to change the business model or the way you do the business, in other words. We are discussing just three of the techniques that are used to do the business model innovation or change the way people conduct the business. One, the servitization. Second technique that companies can use is bundling. Another technique that they can use is the unbundling. Now, what is servitization? If you remember, when we would require a Windows CD, a Windows, Microsoft Windows, or you would need Microsoft applications like Microsoft Word, PowerPoint, Excel. So we would go to the vendor and we would buy a CD, come back to the shop, come back to the homes and install those in our computer. Or sometimes it would come already installed in the computers. In other words, we would require a hard CD to bring back those softwares. Another example in this case could be movie watching. In the past, we would go to the movie renting shops. We would get a cassette for 24 hours or maybe 12 hours. We would bring that cassette and CD and use VCRs and computers to watch those movies. At the same time, if you look at the songs, so we would buy cassettes and CDs to listen to our favorite songs. So these were the services, these were the products that the cassettes, the CDs that we used to buy. Now, how companies transformed, how companies change the way they do the business. Earlier, the Microsoft company would publish what do you call this? The publishing saving their applications on the CDs. So CD was also part of the operations of the business. So collection of the CDs, buying CDs were also a core activity of Microsoft company. But now they have changed. They have removed the CDs from the main product. And now what they are doing, they are basically offering all these windows in the cloud. So you can access these windows and these applications, Microsoft different applications through the internet. So you don't need to buy a CD. At the same time, the Netflix is another example. So all the movies are there in the cloud and a distant server, and you just log in into Netflix and you watch your favorite movie or favorite TV series. You don't need to buy or keep your favorite movies in cassettes and pile up your old room, right? At the same time, if you look at the music industry has also changed. It has changed from the tangible cassettes and CDs to intangible SoundCloud, Spotify maybe, right? Or maybe YouTube in some cases. So these are the different examples how companies transform from manufacturing towards service-oriented companies. So they change their business models. So that is one example how the companies can change their business model. Another example that could be relevant in this case is the Nike company. I hope you all know that Nike doesn't produce even a single shoelace, right? They have outsourced all the manufacturing, whether it is about the footballs or the t-shirts or the socks or any other sporting gear they represent or they put their label on, nothing is produced by Nike company, right? So the company has transformed from a manufacturing powerhouse to just a service company, right? So that is another example of the business model innovation, an example of how companies can transform from a manufacturing company to a service-oriented company. Another technique that they use is the service unbundling. I hope some of you have been to different countries or maybe within the country through airline companies. In the airline companies, the way of doing business is you buy a ticket. When you go to the airport, you get on an airplane, they give you a designated number of the seat. Let's say 16B, 25C, and another number could be given to you. So seat reservation. So your seat is confirmed in the aeroplane. Another thing that you could have seen is they carry your luggage and the hand carry at the same time with no extra cost. They give you, after some time, the air hostesses, they give you certain food and certain drinks and certain coffees to just to as a complimentary uh, to your traveling, right? So the airline ticket, let's say 50,000 ticket, and that would be converted into different kind of services. Certain people, certain entrepreneurs saw that the airline tickets were too expensive and people were reluctant to go to different countries or different regions through aeroplanes. So what they did, they introduced economy class airlines. In the economy class airlines, what they do is they unbundled all the airline ticket. For example, there is a Ryanair company that that operates in the Europe. That is economy class airline company. They do not have any seat reservation. There is no business class. They just introduced the business class, but earlier there were no business class. At the same time, there are no drinks offered, and you cannot carry luggage into the airline company, right? But to carry the luggage, you have to pay extra. If you want coffee, if you want juices, if you want to eat a chocolate or some snacks, so then you have to pay extra. At one point, it is a little bit funny, but at one point they introduced the tickets to the washrooms, right? So if you need to go to the washroom, you have to pay to the airline company. Otherwise, you were not allowed to go to the washroom companies. But then they changed their policy. They changed their policy because in Europe they drink beer. So then when you drink beer, then you have to pee. And when you have to pee, you have to go to the toilet. And then you have to pay extra to go to the toilet. So then the passengers, they would just wait for the aeroplane to go down on the airport, and they would have their favorite beer at the airport then, right? So then they saw their beer sales was declining. So then they changed the policy and they allowed the customers to go to the washroom without an extra charges, right? So that is an example of service unbundling, how an airline company just unbundled, open up all the resources, all the services, and they charge differently extra for each extra service. An example here could also be the university education. Now, the students are complaining, and even the parents are complaining that the universities are raising the fee level. Right? The higher fee is creating a problem both for the students and the teachers. Now, can a university unbundle its resources? When I say unbundling the resources, I mean, can student be charged extra for each extra course they take, let's say? Can they charge be extra for the library usage? Can they be charged extra for an extra book, maybe? Can they be charged extra for using the toilets in the university? Can they be charged extra for using the parking facility? And somehow, some other services could be unbundled at the same time. So then so the students are in control of the overall fee or the net fee they pay at the end of the semester. So if they had borrowed extra book, so the fee, definitely the cost of university education would go up. At the same time, if they would go to the washrooms, so probably they would they add that into the final fee at the same time, right? So can the universities unbundle these resources to be liked again by the parents and the students at the same time, right? So what do you think about this unbundling in the university education? The third example or the third technique that you can use for business model innovation is the service bundling. And this is more obvious in the telecommunication companies. Earlier, the telecommunication companies, they would charge charge separately for the calls, separately for the text messages. Then the internet was introduced. So for the different MBs, they would charge different separate prices. But then they introduced these different packages, these different smart cards by the telecommunication companies. So they bundled all these different. Definitely, a customer would use the mobile phone or the telecommunication services for calls, and at the same time he would text people. At the same time, in a smartphone, he would definitely need to log in and surf the internet at the same time. So to be more likable by the customer, so they started these packages, the smart card packages, etc. So some of the examples could be like that. So that is another example of how the companies transform their business, how they change their pricing strategy from pricing all the services separately to just bundling all the services together into one package at the same time. There is another interesting trend that we can observe in the telecommunication companies, and that is the telecommunication companies are fast becoming the internet banks at the same time. EasyPesa, JSCash, and all these are the different examples. Ironically, funny, there are no such dominant services by the banks. Actually, the money transfer, the online transfer, is actually something that should be done by the banks. But we are seeing that it is the telecommunication companies who are fast becoming the internet banks of our times. So that is again a transformation that we are seeing at the moment. So the business model innovations, right? So in other words, yes, our main question was, can the business models be changed? So now the answer is yes, and there are ways that the companies can transform the business models, right? So I hope it is clear to you guys now that the business models, what are the business models, what are the advantages of the business models, and at the same time, can the business models be changed, right? Now, the final question for this lecture is, what is the difference between the startups and the established firms, right? So it's basically the flexibility, it's basically the change, the room for the change that makes the startups different from the established firms. For the established firm, the business model is almost clear. So they don't need to bring so many changes. So the established businesses become more routine kind of a business model. So there are slight changes. And if they want to change their business model, it would cost them so much. That is why to become the internet banks, the current banks or the traditional banks had to go through a lot of changes. For example, one of the main changes they had to go through were their infrastructure. Now imagine a bank with 800 branches and just buying 10 computers for each branch, how much it would cost them. Then at the same time, training the employees, how much it is going to cost them. So we are talking about the billions and billions of rupees in terms of the transformation. So it's not very much easy for the big businesses to transform their business models. Instead, startups are more flexible. Startups, they don't, because they are less in number, and still they are defining their business models. So that is why it is so much essential for the business, so much easy for the startups to transform their business models. Now, a final example in this case could be the current pandemic. In the current pandemic, we saw that there was so much burden on the health sector. And now, the businesses, the existing businesses, the hospitals are really finding it really hard to cope with the pandemic. But the startups, the IT companies, for them, it is an opportunity. By going to the telehealth or telemedicine, by introducing the telemedicine solutions, they can make some good amount of money, and they can do that because that are just startups. They can just stop doing one thing and start another thing by tomorrow. But the big companies, big IT firms, and the big hospitals cannot do that. They have to carry on their routine business and they cannot stop it there, right? So that makes it difficult for the established firms to change their business model. There is less flexibility in the business models of the established firms, while the startups, there is more flexibility, and that makes the startups different than the established firms, right? I hope it is clear to you by now that what is a business model, right? What are the advantages of the business model? What are the key components of the business model? How many number of building blocks are there? How many number of blocks are there in the business model canvas introduced by Alexander Osterwalder? And at the same time, can the business models be changed? And which companies find it really easy to change their business models? Right. So with this, our part one ends here. Right. In the next part, we are going to discuss how to fill the business model canvas. Right. Hope to see you there. Take care.